So I am a lifelong learner. And so let's think about the classroom. In middle school, did the job that you have right now exist? Raise your hand if the job did not exist when you were in middle school. All right, so now you can imagine the job of a teacher. How do you get students ready for jobs that don't exist? So looking at skills and how to help your students identify information. Other challenges that we have in the classroom is students, we want to put them in that zone of proximal development. So things that aren't too hard, but things that aren't too easy. And so how do we continue to challenge them? Well, lucky for us, AR and VR is a great way to do that. So we have the top 10 reasons that teachers think AR and VR are good in the classroom. I'll show you my 3. Curiosity and wonder. To me, this is huge because when a student is interested in something, they'll go and learn about it on their own outside of the classroom. But the second one is really key to that as well. So I have to be in a safe place. That can be in the classroom, but also it has to be okay to make mistakes. We had a female student who was using Z-Space and said it was okay to make a mistake. And to me, that's it. Because now they can go and experiment. Now they'll try things. And that, to me, is when you really learn. When you try things, often from those mistakes is where you learn the most. At least I do. Luckily, I make a lot of mistakes. And then the last one here is promoting empathy. So part of this is setting up a situation where I can try things. I can see how what I do impacts somebody else or the environment. And again, that's a safe thing to do because it's okay to blow up a motor. When I was teaching in the classroom, I asked students what they want to do this year. All the time, science, they want to blow things up. It's not usually safe. We did a couple of things where we could blow up. But here, I get to go and tell the students, can you go and blow up that motor? They look at me and say, I don't know how. I said, I don't know how either, and I just let them go. And a few minutes later, they realize what resistors actually do when they take them out. So we get to have that safe place and promote learning. Jeremy Bailenson talks about DICE. So these are the reasons why it's so important, and I am clearly focused on education, but things that would otherwise be dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, or expensive. We'll show a quick video. So it's not dangerous to blow apart a motor, especially when it's working, to see how it's working. It is not possible without Ms. Frizzle in the classroom to change gravity and run experiments. And it is counterproductive to just do things to see how that would impact the beach. Not very nice for the people who would like to live there. And then also it can be really expensive to have a cadaver or whole human body in your classroom. So I wanted to bring in one other example where they use Z-Space not in a formal classroom to give you some other ideas. So research with Rebecca Haight and Danny Marshall, they looked at, in this museum, in the Museum of Texas Tech University. When you stand in a museum, you usually see things that are behind glass, and you probably stand like I am right now, at least I do, to indicate that I'm not going to touch anything and remind myself, and you walk quickly past the objects. And so what they did with their research is they scanned some of the objects. Some of them weren't even able to be on display, because again, you only have so much space. We heard somebody else talk about that. And you get to interact with those objects. So what they realized just setting up Z-Space is that when the museum visitors went by, they would spend over 8 minutes on the Z-Space. And what was even more important, at least in my opinion, is that those visitors started to call other people over, even people they didn't know, to talk about the object. So if you're thinking about your goals, now you have this opportunity to show them something they might not be able to see, allow them to interact, and start that conversation around that topic. So what do we need to do to create this? I love this quote, and I find this happens a lot for me, but when I ask people what they want to do, for me, they don't dream big enough. So I like to be a visionary. However, I also need to be building things because I'm working on a product that is out there and impacting education right now. We have over 2,000 school districts in the US, and I've just done a couple international visits as well for some partners who are keying up. So what does the Department of Education say? They want us to think innovative approaches for how students can interact differently with that content. It's not a small challenge there. So how do I build my team? I'm looking for diversity of thought. That's really important. I love it when people have different ideas. So we bring in people who have teaching background. So what is it like? What are those practitioners thinking about a specific topic? But then we also have the subject matter experts. Somebody that has deep knowledge. We had somebody who was working on a PhD in beach and river erosion when we were making that demo. And then we pull it all together because it's very different to put something out in front of you as a real person in the real world than the product or design. So we're bringing all of these perspectives together to build different experiences. Here's an example. I actually have taught this where I gave my students a piece of paper. I asked them to cut this out. They spent way too much time cutting. And then they're looking at 3 different pieces of information as a standard the next generation science standards want them to look at. One is the shape of the landmass. It's a little hard to tell, but some of those are rocks and some of those are fossils. So how do you put those 3 pieces of information together? We had somebody earlier who talked about how a flat map is deceptive. Absolutely. So you can see right away, we'll put it on a 3D globe. So that's helpful. And because we're doing this digitally, I can give you information at different points. So if we go back to how scientists are really working, you get one piece of information sometimes, maybe years later we pull in something else. And so the students actually are going to take pictures of how their idea changes of what the world looked like depending on the information they have. And so that starts to get to some of those different skills and great discussions because it is the past, nobody was around, so that's the best way to get information. Another example here, so this is a NGSS standard. It's not a small standard. It wants you to look at internal and external structures, plants and animals. That's not it, because we like structure and function, which is really important. We need to look at survival, we need to look at growth, behavior, and reproduction. That's a pretty challenging thing to ask a teacher to do. And as I think about being in the classroom, that's hard to set that up to make it engaging. So what we did is we have the lungfish on the left. They live in watering holes. Cichlid are in the river. All right, the lungfish can survive when the water is gone. It actually can survive for a very long time, months, sometimes even years. What do I want to do? I want to move that. Because it's a safe environment, I want to try. I promise no fish were harmed in the making of this, but the cichlid fish will die when it doesn't have water. However, the lungfish, you actually notice too, it got swept downstream. Because if you look at its external fins, it's not a good swimmer. So we're putting together different information, and then we have other scenes in here where we get to see the inside. So now you can see with this information, could you do that argument using what you saw, what you got to experience as you changed and saw the fish's behavior change, and then look at how it has internal and external structures. We also look at in education, you might have a Newton's cradle in your office possibly. However, you don't have that data surrounding it. And so here we want students to be able to predict as there's a collision, there is energy exchanging here, and thinking about, well, how high do I think it will go, and that opportunity to actually see if they're correct. GeoGebra is one of our partners as well. So in education, you think you might have something that's very abstract. And so AR and VR and Z-Space is one of the things that can help make that concrete, and again, put the learning in the hands of the learner. So now we have a child that wants to learn, who has that curious and engagement, and then they deepen that understanding of the topic that they're looking at. I typically talk about students and K-12, but any learner. We had developers who were using one of our applications, and then a few minutes later, they're on their computer learning about that fish. So learners can be at any age. So once we have that, we see improved outcomes, which then lead to preparing people for the workplace. And I want to lead you with a couple quotes here because we're talking about breaking that barrier. In the first quote, you see the students talking about something coming out of the screen and felt like they could touch it, which is a whole nother talk that we could discuss. And then the next one is learning about science and going beyond what they can imagine. And so I'd like to invite you to think that when we can break that screen barrier, we have an opportunity to go beyond even what kids can imagine. Thank you.